Hey everyone, how's it going? So now we have this click handler set up so that it will react every time we press one of these buttons. What we're going to do now is work on actually sending the request to the server to actually add the like or remove the like. So let's go back, and one of the things we need is the post ID that was clicked, because we want to submit a like, but we need to know what post we want to like, right? At the moment, we're just clicking the button, but we have no idea what it's pressed, what the post is, I mean. So what we need to do is find a way of getting the post ID when the button's pressed. So what we'll do is use data attributes to do that. So if I scroll down to our getPostHTML function, what I'm going to do is add a data attribute to the root object. So on the one with the class post, I'm going to say data dash ID like this, and then equals, and then in single quotes, I'm going to just put the post ID. So inside there, I'll put post data dot underscore ID, because underscore ID is the field in the table which has the ID. So now, if I refresh the page, obviously we won't do anything with it yet, but you're going to see, if I inspect on that, you'll see the posts should have an ID right there. So if I collapse this, you'll see each of the posts has their corresponding ID attached to the post element. Okay, so now what we need to do, before we send this, we need to, when the button's pressed, so this button right here, or whichever one it is, it's this one, isn't it? When this button's pressed, we want to get that post ID. Now, of course, we could just attach this post ID to the button as well, but I don't really want to go down the route of attaching the same ID to every single element which needs to use it. What we're going to do instead is when this button's pressed, we're going to go up through the tree until we get to the root post, and then just take the ID from that. Okay? And this will be the same for all of these. No matter which button we press, the first thing we're going to do, so that we know which post we're actioning, we're going to just go up through the tree until we find the root level post, and then take the data ID from that. Okay? So with that in mind, let's do that now. So the first thing we're going to do is get the element that was clicked. Now we've done that already a couple of times. If I take this line up here from the previous click handler we wrote, I'm taking that, copy it, and then go down here and replace this alert. We don't need that anymore. Now we have the button. Now we're using this event property which is passed into this function, so we need to actually go to this function declaration and write event in there so that the click handler will pass through the event to this function. Okay, so now we're calling event.target and putting it in a jQuery object, so the button variable will contain that button that was clicked. And now we're going to get the post ID. So we'll say var post ID equals, and actually let's put this in a separate function. So we're going to come back to that, and underneath that I'll just create the function which will give us the post ID. The reason we're doing it in a separate function and not just writing it in here is because we're going to use this all over the place. Like I said, we'll do it with all these buttons. We might even do it when we click on the post. There'll be delete buttons and stuff we'll do it for. So we're going to use this logic a bunch of times, so it makes sense to put it in a separate function. So this function is going to be called get post ID from element. Now what this is going to do is you're going to give it an element, and then it's just going to go up through the tree and find the post ID from that element you've given it. So in here we're just going to create a variable called element, so this is what's going to be passed into the function. And then what we want to do is get the root element. So root element equals, now there's going to be two situations here. One is when you're pressing the element which is not the root. So if you click on any of these buttons, it will, that's not the root element, and it needs to go up through the DOM to get to this root element and take the ID from that. But another scenario is the user clicks on this post directly, so they actually click on the root element already. In that case, we don't need to go up through the tree because we're already on the root element. Now, where this is going to be used is when we click on the post to go to it. So I clicked on the post just then, and it takes us to that post. So that's a scenario where you would click on the root element instead of one of the child elements. So basically, we need to cover those two scenarios, okay? So in the get post ID from element function, we're going to check if the element is the root element. So actually above that, on the line before, I'm going to say var is root, and then we'll just say that's equal to element dot has class and inside there just say post, because our root elements have the class post. If you see right here, they have the post class. Okay, so if the element that we've passed in has the post class, we know it's the root element. If it doesn't have this class, we know it's a child element. So now we're going to say the root element is going to be, well, what do we want to do? If root element is true, we're going to just return the element that was given to us. If it's not, we're going to go and find it. So we're going to say if is root. Now this is basically saying if is root, and then we're going to say a question mark, and then put element. I'll explain this in a second if this doesn't make sense to you, so don't worry. So then I'll also say element. So then after that, I'll then say element dot closest, and inside there, I'm going to put dot post. So what have we just done? Well, we're saying the root element is going to be set based on this condition. Now, this is what you call a ternary operator, or a conditional operator, I guess you want to call it. So the ternary operator is very common across most programming languages, I would say, and it basically means you're setting the result of this based on a condition. So the condition we're checking for if is root. So it's the same as if we said if root is true. So if this is true, then we know we are the root element. So we're just going to pass in the element they clicked already, which was this one. Okay. So the question mark means if it's true, do this. Now the colon means if that wasn't true, just do this instead. Okay. So once again, if this is true, it's going to set it to element. If it's not true, so we're not on the root element, it's going to set it to this. Now, dot closest is a jQuery function which goes up through the tree to find a parent with a specified selector. In our case, the class dot post. In our case, the class post. So it will go up through its parents and find the nearest element which has the class post. So the root element should now definitely contain the root post. So underneath that, we can then go ahead and get the post ID. So we can say var post ID equals, and then root element dot data, like this, and then dot ID. So this data function, when you call this on an object, is how you get all of the data attributes. So currently, of course, we just have the one for ID, but you could have anything. You could have data dash toast, and then equals something. You could have data dash something else. Like, it doesn't matter. You can have any number of these data attributes, okay? So data right here will give you all of the data attributes attached to that element. Now, of course, we just have the one, which is the ID one right here. So that's why we've said .id on that. So post ID should now contain that post ID value. Okay, so now what we're going to do, just do a quick check to make sure we have it. So we'll say if post ID equals undefined. So if post ID is undefined, we're just going to return alert, and then we'll then say post ID undefined. Just so this will help us if we run into this problem while developing, okay? And then at the end, we'll just say return post ID. Post ID. So if post ID doesn't exist or it's undefined, it will stop here and it just let us know. But if it is, then it will return it. So great, let's take this function. I'm copying the name of the function because I don't want to type that out again. And I'm going to paste it there, and we're going to pass in the element, which in our case is the button. So now we should have the post ID. So what I'm going to do is just log it. Console.log, let me just get this right. Console.log, and then post ID. Now hopefully we should see a bunch of post IDs there. So I've saved it. I'm going to refresh the page. And hopefully when we click the button, we'll hopefully see the post ID, which we do. So each time I click it, you're seeing the post ID for that element, okay?